So what there actually is, in order to solve what we're doing here, is there's a much better solution, which is what's called computed properties. And computed properties are like methods. They sit next to, so it's another thing we add in here into our view object, and there's a thing called computed. And we do colon and we create a new object. Just like methods, we can give them any name we like, and their functions inside. So in here we can put double counter compute. We don't have to call it. We can call these whatever we want. I'm just calling it this to make it clear. And we can copy and paste this code. And let's do double second counter compute. These are kind of long names, but never mind. So let's paste these in. And now we're using these computed properties. So now we've got this here, but now what we can do is we can replace these functions we're calling from methods with the functions that we have in our computed property. So we would do double counter computed, or sorry, double counter compute and double second counter compute. And notice how we don't put the brackets at the end of these ones, unlike with the methods. So this is because this is kind of a very important thing with computed properties. So computed properties, for example, you don't pass arguments into them traditionally. So that's something to bear in mind. The difference between a computed and a method is that a computed property is smart. So computed property, and we'll see this now. So remember before with our methods, that the methods were all getting rerun, regardless of whether they needed to be changed or not. Yep, they were just getting run regardless.
Yeah.
Computed properties are smart in that they cache their value. So the values that get determined here, they get cached by VueJS, and VueJS is now smart enough that it will only recalculate them if any of the variables inside of them change. So now, for example, we see. So when we first load the page, as you probably would expect again, we still get first counter and second counter showing as changed. But now if I just change one of the counters, only the relevant counter, the first counter in this case, is updated. That's the difference between computed properties. So that they're much more performance efficient. They're much more performant.
Why is it that computer properties can't take arguments, or like why, or basically why are methods not computed? Why aren't methods completely replaced by computed argument things?
So again, that's one of the things that we'll actually find there's another class of arguments here. But yeah, I mean, generally speaking, you do usually want to be using computed properties and not methods in your Vue.js, because computed properties are a lot smarter and they're a lot faster. But yeah, as you mentioned, methods can't take in computed can't take in arguments, because again, we don't call them with this brackets at the end. And you can't use them like they've got with brackets at the end. Otherwise they will break, I believe. Yeah, so if we try and use this like a function, you see that you get double counter compute is not a function in your you get an error here. So these are not these get changed by Vue into like special properties of your data. So they're kind of not functions anymore, because Vue.js is doing like magic with them. So if you want so for example, you wouldn't use computed properties inside to respond to events like we use with methods, Dan. So if you want to if you want to on click, you want to actually like run a method or something. I've just written blah, 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 blah. But if you want to run a method, that would always be something in methods. You'd never get it to run something in computed. In general, you want to be using computed properties whenever you basically want to kind of transform your data to another format. So one example might be, say in our data here, say we're storing, we're doing a weather app, and we're storing the temperature in Celsius. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one application of a computed property is you might have a computed property that's like temperature Fahrenheit, that just automatically the function that converts the Celsius temperature to a Fahrenheit temperature. If that makes sense.
Yep.
That would be a common use case where you'd want to be using a computed property, and that's kind of if you get my gist, that's kind of like the way they're supposed to be used. Like a computed property is supposed to represent like a different transformation of one of your things you have in data. If that makes sense at all.
And when should you not use computed properties over, as in like when should you use methods? Is there like a
So methods always have to be used in events. Yep. So when you're doing event listeners, that always has to be a method. The other thing about computed properties is you should never change. So inside computed properties, you should never ever like set the value of a counter to be something. That's like while you can do that, that's strongly not advised to. Actually, I don't even know whether you can. I've never actually done it. But you're not supposed to set the value. Inside methods, we can make a method here that sets the value of all these properties, and it'd be fine of these data here. Inside of computed, you should never change your data. The other thing with computed properties.
why shouldn't you? Why is that bad? Or
because computed properties are basically only supposed to represent like transformations of your existing data.
Yeah.
If you get me. So in this case here, we're just timesing our current counter by 2.
Yeah.
We're kind of like transforming our data already. We're not changing it.
Sure.
And that's kind of just the way they're designed. Although if you start changing the data, you end up messing with the whole caching thing that VueJS has kind of going on in the back end that makes computed properties fast. So but yeah, in most cases, computed properties are better than methods. There's one other important case where computed properties can't be used. And that is when, so computed properties always have to be synchronous. So you guys familiar with the word, if I say synchronous, what that means?
No.
Okay, so synchronous basically means that you can't, the function basically has to run from top to bottom. It always has to return something when it runs.
Sorry, yeah, you said this yesterday. Sorry.
Yeah, so this function, all these computed properties, they must return something. They can't just be like console.log. That won't work. They have to explicitly return something. Again, methods don't have to return something. Methods are just functions. Computed properties have to return something. So say if we want to do something like set timeout. So say we want to make it such that when we click our buttons, that they reset automatically after 5 seconds. You could think, how would you think about doing this? Well, you'd go set timeout. You'd do function, and we do this.counter equals 0. And we pass in 5,000 because this set timeout is in milliseconds. Yep. This kind of violates 2 things. Firstly, it violates a thing where you're not supposed to change the data inside of a computed property.
How is that, Rob? How is that not transforming the data though? Like
this is transforming the data.
But I thought
oh no, sorry. This is mutating the data. Sorry, not transforming.
What's the difference between multiplying a value of counter times?
We're not setting counter here. We're just taking in counter and we're doing something to it and we're spitting out a number.
Okay. Yeah,
not overwriting the value of counter that we have.
Yeah.
This one here, we're setting counter explicitly. We're saying counter equals 0. The reason why this could be a problem here is, remember, this computed property gets called whenever counter gets changed. Yep. But then if we're changing counter inside, then what we've effectively done is we've created a recursive function that's just going to loop that could loop forever if you're not careful. Because it's like you've got a computed function, you're changing counter, the computed function gets called, which changes counter, which calls the computed function, which changes counter, and it goes on forever if you're not careful. So that's something to be aware of. Now, actually, yeah. So you can't do something like this as well, though, with this set timeout, if that makes sense at all. For one, because we're actually setting counter. But say we wanted to just, say we just wanted to do anything. Say we wanted to do console.log, like, hey. Like that
one of the people.
This wouldn't work because we're not returning anything here. We're not returning anything when the function runs. Because this set timeout doesn't run for 5 seconds after the computed property is done, is calculated. If that makes sense. So a computed property always has to return something the moment the function's called. It can't like wait around for it. So in this case, we have to return this dot counter times 2. So does that kind of make sense? If you had it, make sure. I mean, I can give you guys like a couple of minutes if you want to have a little play around with computed properties and just kind of get them into your own head. Because they're kind of weird, but they're quite important to know how to work.
Do you have a more complicated example, or like, I mean, is there one on the Vue website, to be honest? But,
let's have a look and see what's on the Vue website in terms of computed properties.
How's the tube today?
The tubes have gotten quieter today. Yeah, so for example, in their examples here, Dan, is they've got one here, for example, where, for example, they have a message in data, and then their computed property reverses the message. That's another kind of example of something you could do. It's any sort of thing where you want to kind of display the data you have in a different way, but you don't want to change the data.
Yeah.
Could you do basically anything you can define in a computed property? Could you just write that inside like your expression in the curly brackets?
Yes, precisely. Yeah, anything you can. I mean, they kind of stress that up here. So you can. I mean, the only downside of curly brackets is, number one, it's not as easy to read. And number two is you can only do logic in effectively one line of JavaScript inside of curly brackets.
Oh, okay.
Isn't all JavaScript just one line, or like a lot of it, right?
But
you got curly brackets.
If you do this at any sort of professional level or imperial visualizations, you will not make any friends with anyone because it will be really hard to read.